So, hey everybody, welcome along. So today we're going to go through, it's kind of a little bit of a different one because it's really focused in just on one topic. So we're going to do our standard icebreakery stuff. I'll run through the plan. We'll run through the little bit of housekeeping and previously on, because that's just making sure everyone's on the same page. And then we're going to focus on what we're doing on accessibility at the moment. We've got a discovery and an alpha happening now. An emission. Normally, we would have done this well before we started the work. However, we got approval to start the work and everything to get the work started within about 3 weeks of Christmas. So we had no time to get a lot of the socialization and things like that done. So the comms plan is actually running about probably a good 8 weeks behind the actual project at the moment. So I'm trying to catch it up a little bit. So I'll talk you through accessibility, how we're looking at it, how we're talking about it, what this Discovery Alpha piece is. And then I've got the start of what potentially could be the service. And I'd like your feedback on what I've missed, what I haven't missed. This is very definitely just a very draft version of where we are on accessibility. So I'm going to do icebreaker and intros first. There's only about 7 of us on the meeting, so this will be nice and fast. So we're going to do name, pronoun, where we're from, and is your closest bus stop accessible? Because this is part of what we need to talk about. When I say closest bus stop, if you've got to choose, you just tell me your closest one. So, hey, I'm Dr. J, use they as a pronoun. I'm a service designer, business analyst. I'm working as a subject. I'll just allow more people in. I'm working at DFT as the service owner / subject matter expert on NaPTAN. And is my closest local bus stop accessible? Yes, they all are, because I have the joy, thank you, Gerard, of living in the centre of London, and all of my bus stops have are relatively high, have good landing areas, and also generally have tactile paving as well on most of them. So now I'm going to run down the list of people. Today I'm going to, Andy, you're going to be up first. I'm just going to run down the list. So Andy Hole, off you go.
Hi, I'm Andy Hole. I am a he, him. I am from National PTI, which is a local authority and bus operator owned company that does stuff. My closest bus stop is not accessible. I checked it earlier on. It does not have a raised curb, but it does have a nice shelter, and the pavement is accessible because that's got low stuff, but there isn't a raised curb by my bus stop.
Good to know. Good to know. Sean Dalby, you're the next person up.
You called me just as I was taking a mouthful of food.
Of course.
It's all right. That's fine. I'm Sean Dalby. He, him. I'm from Liverpool City Region, Mersey Travel. I have absolutely no idea about my local bus stop because I've never really paid attention to it. It's accessible enough for me, but it doesn't mean it's accessible for everyone else.
Good to know. We'll get you to go. I'll send you out doing a picture survey for the next one, maybe. Dan Saunders, you're the next one up.
Hi, Dr. J. Yes, Dan Saunders from Basemap. We provide software and solutions for public transport data. I'm a he, him, and my local bus stop. I'm not sure. Maybe by the end of this, you'll have to tell me if it's accessible or not. That'll be the hope and dream, won't it?
Oh, that is the dream within a dream. Channeling, is it Peter? It's Peter Cook, isn't it, from The Princess Bride, where he plays the pompous celebrant. So yes, that is what we're aiming for. But you might need to actually wander down and tell me whether or not I've got it right. Thanks for that, Dan. Gerard Butler, you're the next one up.
Gerard Butler, Service Performance Manager of TfL Journey Planner, he, him. Nearest stop. Yeah, I like this question, actually. It's one I can get on board with. Is my nearest bus stop accessible? Yes, I believe it is, but unfortunately, despite the intro, there are several stops in London that aren't accessible. But my one is, so that's at least something.
So I'm going to preface London I live in central London on the edge of zone 1, zone 2. So to me, London is anywhere that I can walk, which is basically most of zone 1, which is fortunately the most accessible bus stops possible. I know as you move outwards, things develop in quite different ways. And that's an interesting question to consider and ponder as to how we conceive of this. The next person up after Gerard is Jonathan Bigwood.
Hi there, I'm Jonathan Bigwood, he, him. I work for Central Bedfordshire Council and look after NaPTAN travel line data for my own council and also Bedford and Luton boroughs. I actually work remotely and live out in near Wokingham in Berkshire, so my local bus stop isn't one I'm responsible for, I'm pleased to say. Having said that, yeah, I think they're both reasonably accessible. In one direction, it has got a slightly raised curb. The other direction hasn't got a raised curb, but it's a high enough curb for a wheelchair ramp to be deployed at when needed. And you can cross the road between the two at a pedestrian crossing with dropped curbs. So that counts as accessible. We also have a feature on many of the buses where the bus will actually talk to you as it comes to the bus stop and say number 4 to Reading, so you can actually hear it from outside.
Oh, amazing! That's even better. Wow,
that's a Reading buses thing.
That's one that I hadn't considered, is the talking bus. I will ponder that one. Thank you, Jonathan. Lisa, you're the next one up.
Hello, I'm Lisa Marshall. I'm the Transport Information Manager at Mersey Travel, so local authority. She, her, sorry, should have said that. And my local bus stops in both directions both have raised curbs. No shelters or any other facilities, just a post but raised curbs. So in that respect, accessible.
Fantastic. And then Richard, you're the only Richard. Yes, you're the only Richard today. Richard, you're the next one up.
Hi.
Oh, no, there's two Richards. Richard Oglethorpe.
Sorry?
Oh, okay. Gentlemen of a certain age are often called Richard. Yeah, I'm Richard Oglethorpe, Liverpool City Region Combined Authority. I'm a he, him. I've been to that London on occasion in the suburbs, and I've seen lots of inaccessible bus stops. So although the city centre might be quite accessible, it hasn't spread everywhere. My local bus stop is in a driveway next to a rotting tree. It's very far from accessible, unfortunately.
Thank you, Richard. Oh, Richard H., you're the next one up.
Hi. Sorry for the interruption there. Yeah, it's Richard Hall, he, him. I work for Ito World. I have several bus stops close to me. Some of them have raised curbs and some don't. But I think it depends what we mean by accessible. Clearly, people have different accessibility requirements. It's okay having raised curbs, but other people have challenges with sight and hearing, and none of the bus stops near me have any facilities to cover those. So hopefully that might be addressed in the conversation we have today.
I think that is part of the conversation we're going to have today, Richard. So you've brought us on, nicely segued there. I appreciate your segueing me onto the plan for today. We're going to do our very quick housekeeping that I always do, but I know there's some new people on this, and it's just making sure that you know all the different things you can sign up for. Then we're going to go through the previously on, because there's some outcomes from previous meetings that I just want to make sure everyone's on the same page on. And then I'm going to talk through accessibility. I'm going to cover the problem we are solving, what those horizons look like for us, and that they're quite blurry, what the work that we're currently doing till the end of this financial year, which is called a Discovery Alpha piece. Yes, it's unusual to mix the two together. I'm breaking everybody's models of how to work. And then I'm going to take you through how we're starting to draft out the service, and I would really love your feedback and your input on what I've missed, what questions I should be asking, what I haven't thought about, what would raise red flags for you, what looks totally green. All of those vibes things is kind of what we're aiming for on the second half of the meeting. And then we've got a little feedback corner. So very, very quickly, housekeeping. All of these meetings are recorded. and we publish them up on a YouTube channel, the most bespoke, tiny YouTube channel of about 40 people, but it's really good because you can go and see any of the previous meetings. We usually run 2 of these now, one on a Tuesday, one on a Thursday, once a month. We record them both and they stay, and they're all published up on the same YouTube channel. We also have an Eventbrite that you can sign up for, because the free Eventbrite limits it to 25 tickets for free. We basically, if I ever have more than 25 people, I just will up the number of tickets that we offer for that one meeting. We also have a newsletter that we send out every month. We send out an update on what we've done on NaPTAN, what products we've got coming up, what launches we've got coming up, and we also give out the stability information so that you're aware of how stable the system's been, hopefully giving you all that confidence that this is the new world of NaPTAN is wonderfully rock solidly stable. We've got some meetings coming up. This is February. February is next month. This isn't February yet, not till the next meeting, which isn't February's meeting because January. Anyway, and then I also had to change the dates in March because I discovered there was this thing called Easter, which meant that all the meetings the dates that I originally put in were basically in the middle of the Easter break. So we're going to cover data quality next month, and then we'll do a wrap up of the accessibility work in March. And then by February, March, I'll know what I'm talking about in April, May and June. Just running back. So previously on NaPTAN, we've now got managed removal put in. Andy has been one of our lovely private beta testers. We've now had over 2,500 stops removed from NaPTAN in this controlled process. So previously you couldn't remove stops from your NaPTAN dataset. They just had to hang around, even if they were physically gone. We now have a method for removing them. Andy's put through about 2,000 and a bit over the last couple of weeks. So we're now well over 2,500 stops. I want to open the invite to any other local authorities to come on board. Gerard, we'd love to talk to you. And I believe Sarah, when she's back, will be having a chat because we want to bring on TfL and Transport for Greater Manchester are kind of next up. And then we've got some spare capacity. So we want people who are ready to remove the dead stops, the stops that no longer physically exist from their data, to get in touch and we'll get you onto the system. For those who are on Trapeze, there is an update to Trapeze that will need to happen before you can join us, and we are working with Trapeze to make sure that that happens. Gerard.
Yeah, sorry, for my benefit and the benefit of people, can you just recap what this sort of facility offers? Would I be right in saying that at the moment, when we upload, stops are classified as active and inactive, and this initiative allows us to remove the inactive stops that have no prospect of coming back? Is that right, or have I got that wrong?
That's it in a nutshell, Gerard.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
No problems at all. It's effectively, we know that there were stops that were physically removed or physically enabled, the roads changed or something, but you're stuck with a stop that you couldn't get out of the data. We put in a little facility to be able to do that. I know that you've got some. I know Transport for Greater Manchester have quite a few to go through. We had some discussions on street versus schema, trying to figure out how to represent what's on the street better in the data. We still haven't reached a consensus. That's part of what we're planning to look at a little bit, hopefully in the next financial year, when we start to talk about data quality, just kind of looking at how best we can represent in the schema what's on the street in a way that everybody can use it and coalesce around doing the same thing. At the moment, there's 147 local authorities, or 147 ACCO codes. There's kind of 147 ways plus of doing everything, and we're just trying to get things just a little bit coalesced, because you've all read the schema, you've all followed the schema, and you've all interpreted it in little dialects, and we're getting little data dialects everywhere. So we're just trying to pull it back together. Precisely and accurately, this is about how we say where a bus stop is. Everybody's doing eastings, northings to the correct precision. We love you for this. We also concluded the best point to measure a bus stop from is where the passenger needs to stand to catch a bus. Now, usually this is right besides the flag, but where it's not, where there's a difference, like it's a tail stop or the flag is slightly further up for whatever reason in the space to measure it from, if you need to measure it, is where the passenger would need to stand. It's one of those things that's just going to make accessibility a little bit easier. If we're needing to guide somebody to a metre by metre spot, they're going to be in the right part of the spot. We also have looked at the conversion from eastings, northings to lat long. There's Ordnance Survey, have a little tool for doing this. We have done a little bit of work to see how out different local authorities are as people come on to bulk removal, because we know some people are using Null Island to get the very dead stops out of the way of other stops. Once people are on bulk removal, we can start really looking through how close your conversions are and if there's anything with your software or something that you might need to look at. Andrew, you'll be pleased to know most of yours are within 0.1 of a metre of what they should be calculated as. So there's absolutely no problems with many of yours. There are some outliers, and part of this little bit of work is identifying those outliers and having a chat of, are these actually in the right place? Is there a typo somewhere? We know what a coach is. We went through a whole pile of stuff on the coach references and the 900 coach stops. These were not being used at all. So as part of the replatforming of NaPTAN, we had to move some stuff manually. We just didn't move the 900 coach stops. Nobody's complained. Nobody noticed. They didn't get moved in 2021. This data can now be completely withdrawn from NaPTAN. So if you're updating your data, you don't have to put in a coach stop reference, a coach reference, because it's no longer being used. Dan, you're about to tell me this is the first you've heard of it?
No, not necessarily. We have a lookup because the 900 code is still used by National Express, but we have a lookup to the local NaPTAN code, and we handle that as part of our NCSD processing. So they are still used by the original data providers, but we convert that as part of our processing.
One of the things, and maybe this is something you and I need to have a quick chat on, is when we looked at whether we should upload them and how they're used, nobody was updating them. The last updates were in the 2010s that we could find. So this might be one of those things where we might want to put them back in a little controlled fashion and just make sure that they are actually updated now. But let's take this offline and have a chat over the next couple of weeks. Roadmap feedback. Our roadmap has changed since I wrote this. Where DFT is still looking at mapping solutions that it uses across the department. Once we have an actual word on that, we'll be able to go through. We then also went through to have a look at ATCO codes and NaPTAN codes and how people create them. I discovered that you all use very different ways. You all talk about them slightly differently. And when I say slightly differently, even calling one the long and the short code, there are some people for who they're the same length. So it's caused us a little bit of data integrity because we're just trying to double check how things are done. However, if you are taking on a local authority, or you've taken on a local authority and you can't figure out how they've created these codes, or you need some more NaPTAN codes created with the right way, we've been able to build some spreadsheets that allow you to do that. So we've done that for one local authority, and more than happy to do something similar. It's quite replicable once you got your head around it. And finally, because we did a lot in the last 18 months or so, we put in data retention. So what we did was we did a lot of work in the back ground around how we manage data, how we manage the data you give us, how much we store, how much we throw away. And we also now have a long-term data storage that will store NaPTAN data on a yearly basis for 100 years. So we are thinking as future-proofing as we can of planning all of this. And what we've been able to do as part of putting this very structured way of storing data in is we've saved 97% of the monthly storage costs by putting this in place. We only store what we need, and we're very careful about what we need. One of the other things was if anything happens to your local authority and you need us to quickly revert to the last good one, we had to do that for somebody when they had a software update that went a little bit wrong and they suddenly lost almost all of their stops, over 90% of their stops, and they uploaded a NaPTAN data file that only had 65 stops on it. We could quickly identify the last good version of the stop and put it in, because we now have all of the input files very structured, and it took less than 10 minutes for us to find that file and put it in as soon as we were notified of it. Dan.
Hello again. On that, so is there any way you could automatically detect there's a large change or deletion of stops from one upload to the other way, so that doesn't go into the live system? Because we found that when processing data in Swansea, suddenly had no stops in it at all. Is there a way in which you can automatically say, oh, if there's more than 10%, there's got to be a manual trigger to copy the files across or something like that?
It is one of those things that we're thinking of based on that situation. It happens very, very, very rarely. This is, I think, the first time it's happened in like 3 years of like that massive loss of data or loss of data from a local authority. It is one of the ideas that we've got in our backlog. We just need to think about what other things we want to spend our development time on and which ones we're going to do. But it's such a good idea, and I really like it in terms of hey, this is X% smaller than it should be, is very much kind of what we would like to think about it as, just to make sure that somebody hasn't accidentally pulled up the wrong thing. I'm not sure when we would do it, but it's a really good idea. So thank you for that one. So, taking a deep breath. Are there any questions on anything else before I kick off onto our draft service design for accessibility data in NaPTAN, which is the thing I know that you're all here for? No? Right, let's fire on in. So, our service goal. Now, when I say NaPTAN, I don't mean just the data set, I mean us as a service. So, I know that we use NaPTAN as multiple things. It's a file, it's a data set, it's a schema, it's a way of life, it's a way of thinking about bus stops. It's an app that runs the website. It's also kind of the team, the entire meta thing of all of this data around transport. So ensure that all of this data around transport holds accessibility data. And the DFT goal is to have NaPTAN able to meet policy goals on accessibility across public transport. Essentially, if we're putting out there that there are things that we need to do, we want to have the technology that supports it. We want to make sure that we've got the data and the technology and everything in there to support people in the efforts to make things accessible, and so that we can measure those goals, but also so that passengers can use them. So in scope, we've got a little bit of a scope here, and this is a very, very small, quick one. And I've realized that things are moving, and I am just going to do one very quick thing. Just bear with me here 2 seconds, everybody. I'm just going to do a quick all and then lock everything down, because I forgot to do that when I started today. And now I need to just refresh the page because it decides that I never want to access things again. Right. So in scope, we've got some questions that we're going to ask. What accessibility data do we already have for stops? What does that look like? What street furniture data do we have for stops? What information can we infer without doing an audit from the stuff that we've got? What types of accessibility can we get data for? Do we only have data about step free? Can we understand blind? Can we understand accommodations we've put in for deaf users? Can we infer any of those? Out of scope at this time is any accessibility information schema and audit. We are not going to build a new schema. We are not going to say that anyone should go out and do an audit. We're trying to figure out other ways of doing the world, and also any legislation is completely out of scope. There's a quick dictionary there. This is more for people who are new to NaPTAN, because I also use this inside of a lot of DFT, just trying to explain the difference between all the different, what is an ATCO code, what is an ATCO area code, what is a NaPTAN code, what does a status mean, what is a stop, what is a user, all of these things. So what problem are we solving? How are we looking at this from a user's point of view? So you've all seen Beryl. You all know Beryl goes to see Beverly. This is Beryl. Beryl lives in Bristol. Beryl wants to see her friend Beverly. Beverly lives in Birmingham. I like alliteration. I love Dr. Seuss. This is Brenda. Brenda is in a wheelchair. Brenda lives in Bristol. Brenda wants to see her friend Beverly. Beverly also lives in Birmingham. So Brenda wants to make the same journey in the same way as Beryl does. So the current situation is Beryl from Bristol can do a multi-operator, more than one operator in the same type of, and I'm just going to have to hide cursors, in the same type of transport, e.g. 2 different types of bus operators, multimodal, more than one type of transport, e.g. rail and buses, and multi-local authority. So we're moving across local authority boundaries. So Beryl doing this journey, covering multi-operator, multimodal, and multi-LA, she can use a travel planner. She can plan her journey in one place, and she has all the information she needs to have agency and autonomy over her travel plans. She'll often be shown 2 or 3 different journeys that might have slightly different times and different costs, and she can choose which journey she can make, and she has all of the information to make that choice. Brenda, trying to do the same thing, has quite a different journey. Brenda uses a travel planner. She can plan her journey in one place, but she needs to then also go and check with every operator, every mode, and every local authority to try to find the accessibility information for her journey. It's very hard for her to gather all of the information she needs so that she has agency and autonomy over her travel plans, so that she can choose which of the 2 or 3 options that would be best for her. She doesn't have that information. So what often happens is Brenda decides not to use public transport to make the journey to see Beverly. And because of that decision, there are 2 outcomes, both of which are bad, and I've called them the red and the black outcome. This isn't doing any real hierarchy. So the red option is Brenda drives a private vehicle. So she takes a car and is driven or drives herself to go see Beverly. The second option, which is the black option and is almost the worst option, is Brenda decides not to travel to see Beverly. So this increases Brenda's social and economic isolation. So those are kind of 2 not very good options that come out of not being able to plan a journey. Now, this is quite simplistic, and I know that there's nuance, and if you want to tell me the nuance, feel free to put stickies on to give me a sense of what nuances I haven't included and what else I need to include here. So why is Brenda not able to have the same journey as Beryl? So Beryl's transport was linked up in the early 2000s when NaPTAN was created. I'm using a very vague dating here because I know NaPTAN from version 1 to version 2.1 had a little bit of a time where it circled around. So I use early 2000s as kind of a start time. NaPTAN allowed data that had been in silos to be joined up by providing a what is where for all public transport. NaPTAN stops are described in a consistent format with each having a unique identifier. This is trying to describe NaPTAN to people who've never heard of it. Brenda, why is Brenda not able to do this? Brenda can also plan a journey using a travel planner. She will be unable to view accessibility information about it in the travel planner for most travel planners. She can view it inside a siloed travel planner, but not for a national travel planner, not across an entire journey. The data Brenda needs is in a silo for each operator, mode, and local authority. Andy, I'll come to your question in 2 seconds when I've just finished talking this through. The data Brenda needs is in a silo. Brenda needs to visit each of these to view their accessibility information. Sometimes the information Brenda needs may not be consistent between providers. People will describe things in slightly different ways, and sometimes the information Brendan needs may not be accessible to the public. For example, the Olympic data was published in a public format, but struggles in various ways to be surfaced. Andy, your question.
Yeah, our National Journey Planner has options to have a step-free journey or needs assistance, although we're basing the outcome on suspect data from the last DFT accessibility thing. So
yeah, I believe.
Yeah, but our journey planner, you can ask for a step-free journey, and I think that was based on the Olympic stuff.
Is that Travelline Southwest or is that National
Southwest.
Travelline? Southwest, yeah.
It's Travelline Southwest, but it's the National Journey Plan that we do. Yeah. That's really great, and you may very well be somebody who, when we do something more with the data and get it, we can then build on your journey planner. So we've been playing around with a lot of the journey planners, and we know that it's difficult to get a consistent view. There's also new information that's come in since. There's been some accessibility audits, but the Olympic data has never been updated, so it's not been able to take that into account to when things have changed, especially with rail stations. It's not been able to be pulled into that same travel planner. So this is all the little edge that we're working on. But thank you for that, Andy. I'm going to borrow you intently, and I know that you're talking with our user researchers. Anyone else before I move on? I'm trying to explain in as simpler way as possible why there's these little bits of problems. Gerard.
So I'll try and be brief. A couple of quick questions. Are we just focusing on bus stops for the purposes of this discussion with my first question? My second question is there or should there be a definitive definition of what an accessible bus stop is? If I can be concise, TfL's definition indicates that it needs to have bus stop painted on the road with a yellow line, a actual marker on the bus stop flag itself, so like a sort of a mini urban clearway, or there's another term for it, and obviously unimpeded space for a wheelchair ramp to actually be deployed onto the pavement. I think there's one other aspect I can't remember, but as I say, those are the sort of, and probably sort of fourth thing is it's actually hard standing, so it's not a grass verge or anything like that.
So cool. I've got two questions. I'm just trying to remember them all. I have to work from my fingers, or I'll grab a pen and paper, because I can do two things. Could possibly do three. I'll answer. So first off, one of the reasons for focusing on bus stops is they're 95% of what's in the data set, of what's in the NaPTAN data set. So we're focusing on them. While there has been some stuff on the rail stations, we want to bring that in. We also know that tackling the hard problems like King's Cross St Pancras International is a hard accessibility problem. We're taking the thought here that if we are able to tell somebody if their local bus stop is accessible, that's going to open public transport options to slightly more people than saying that King's Cross St Pancras has a lot of accessibility information. That's one of the things that we're working on, and this is part of why we're doing this Discovery Alpha. Your second question, which was about how do we define an accessible bus stop? Your stuff is really good. There is also, I've read through 3 papers on the accessibility of bus stops, the installation of tactile paving, and there was something else that was another one that was all about, it was about accessible bus stops and how many meters away and things like that. I don't want us to get into those definitions. One of the things that I'm wanting to ask is what are the different lenses that we need to view accessibility data through? Is it solely through step free? And does step free mean that everyone who uses a wheelchair would be comfortable using it, or is there variations on step free that we need to be aware of? So there's a lot of work that we're also going to do to have a look at how we combine some of this data, how we infer some of this data and create these lenses. This is what we're hoping to get out of this Discovery Alpha and talking with people. So hopefully, Gerard, I've answered both of your questions okay. I'm going to take a breath and go to Dan and get Dan's questions.
Yeah, sure. So it's just a bit of a thing. So when the stuff was done for the Olympics regarding accessibility, it didn't just look at the stops, it looked at the services, and if the services and the vehicles themselves were accessible. I think that's something worth calling out now, whilst obviously latest bus operator grants and things that make sure that vehicles are accessible. We've now seen the emergence of things like demand responsive transport that are also utilising the NaPTAN stops, and then vehicles quite often don't have room to put a wheelchair on and things like that. So a big thing that the 2.5 Transit Exchange Schema did, and that's the thing that Travelline are using the National Journey Planner. And that 2.5 is bringing that old kind of historical service information. Is a service accessible or not for wheelchair users and things like that. It's not really a more of a comment than a question. So I did think that going to the plan of, Brenda being able to do a journey planner, whereas the stops accessible, that's part of the solution. But also to make sure the vehicle that they're going to utilise is also able to utilise that as well.
Thank you, Dan. That's a really great point. Because NaPTAN is just the what is where. It's the combination of our data up with the BODS and the TNDS data and the CNDS data. The being able to say yes, you can do this journey or not, and it's because we haven't been able to do great stop level data. It's kind of like, okay, can we make the stop level data at least to a certain level? And also, if Brenda is blind, can she understand what she would need to do to have her journey? If she is deaf, is it very, very clear where accommodations have been made, where there's good visual cues for people? One of the other things that I have noticed is there are some stops that are accessible in daylight that have no streetlights near them. So after dark, for anyone who is partially sighted or is slower walking or something, it would be just crossing the road would be far riskier because there's no street lighting. So it's going to be a lot more difficult spotting where to go and things like that. So it's just how would we indicate some of those? But this is that weirdness of if we start to dive down this rabbit hole, we may never come out. So I'm going to pause for breath and say, Andy, you've got questions or comments?
It's sort of a question. Oh, no, it's a comment, really. A wheelchair user is never only just a wheelchair user, unfortunately, because most of the time they're not in a push-along wheelchair. They're in a big buggy, which is almost a 4x4, And I know when we used to live when our company was based in Plymouth City Bus, anytime they had a new wheelchair user that wanted to use a bus, they had to have an accessibility trial to make sure their vehicle would fit on the bus. So some of the vehicles these accessibility people are using are not wheelchairs. Yes,
so there is that's a really good point, and that's also some of what we want to help indicate to people. I have two friends who are both using wheelchairs. One of who uses a very lightweight, very minimalist wheelchair because that is what works for them. They can get around. It's got electric assist. Another friend has a much more complex setup for their needs. Their wheelchair weighs quite a lot. I think it's about 120 to 150 kgs, and it is also quite sensitive to slope because of trying to balance them. So there's these things that somebody might need to know to even make a decision about a stop is the steepness of the ramp. If you're trying to get off a upper ferry quay and it's the tide's got out, and what was quite an easy slope is now a little bit steeper than your wheelchair can manage. That's actually something that somebody might need to be aware of. Again, running down a rabbit hole, which we're going to try and explore as part of this discovery, to try and understand where some of those edges are and how we describe it, because there's a difference between step-free and level. And some wheelchairs, even the big buggies, can handle a gap, and some wheelchairs can't. So there's all these little nuances that we just need to kind of pull out and surface and think about and find ways of talking about. Does that make sense to everybody before I ramble on? So effectively, the outcome that we want to create is Brenda can plan a journey using a travel planner. Sounds so simple, doesn't it? She will be able to view the accessibility information in the travel planner, and the information Brenda views is consistent between modes, operators, and local authorities. So when somebody says the stop is accessible, or is step free, or is good for blind people, or whatever, it is very clear what that means across all of them. So taking a small moment of breath. So what we're doing is, so a discovery is about taking the questions wide and looking at where all the edges are and coming back with enough of the answers around those questions. And alpha is also known as a technical proof of concept. So this is about taking some of these ideas and seeing if we can technically do them. If it's technically possible for us to take a pile of really messy data, combine it in the right way, and infer and come up with something that's actually usable, or does it just infer and come up with something that is so messy and so unusable, it's not the way forward and we need to sit down and rethink. So these are the hypotheses that we are working on. So our first hypothesis is the data exists for some/most of Great Britain, England, Scotland and Wales, and is not published for passengers, or it is published in silos. And then I've explained what a silo is. The second hypothesis is if we provide the access information to a NaPTAN data consumer, they will be able to publish it to passengers. So we're making an assumption that, Andy, if you run a journey planner, if I give you that accessibility information, you will be able to surface it. We're not saying how you would surface it or how it works. And then the third is the access information published will be understood by passengers, giving them the agency and autonomy to make travel decisions. So whatever information we provide, it's never a guarantee. It's always about giving somebody agency and autonomy over their travel decisions of choosing which route they take, which stops they go via, what modes they travel on. So what are we doing in the discovery? Our discovery will be about uncovering the accessibility information already in the ecosystem. We know about the Olympic data. We know about some of the other little bits of data out there. We've been trying to uncover it. We want to uncover what the data consumers expect of accessibility information. So if somebody is running a journey planner, what do they expect the accessibility information to look like? Do they expect it to be at platform level, at station level, just for bus stops, for an entire area? If it's talking about stops in various ways, do we just expect that all custom stops are never going to be accessible because they are literally just the side of the road by custom, and how we would play around with that. And then we also want to understand how passengers with access needs want to consume information. So we don't want to tell our travel planning apps what to do, but we want to show that if we surface this data, it could be understood this. If it's shown this way, it's understood by passengers. If it's shown this way, it's not. And just giving a little bit of insight into how different people are using travel planners and how they're thinking about their travel journeys. One of the things we've already uncovered is there a difference between being able to plan a travel journey that is notionally accessible, or is it about knowing the accessibility of a journey that has already been planned? So there's two slightly different nuances in where the travel planning happens and what the travel planner needs to know about, travel planning app needs to know about to plan a journey with this information. And that's quite a nice little fun area to play. And then for the technical alpha, which we're doing at the same time, because why not? Why not do two things at once? So the technical alpha, we've put some constraints in, and I will just go through those and then I'll go through what the alpha is. So the constraints that we've put on ourselves is we cannot ask a local authority to transform data. So if we're asking you for data, we just want the data. We don't want to tell you to transform it. We don't want to tell you to put it into a certain format. We just want to find out what we can get from you. Is it just a flat file that you could produce once every 12 months? Is it from Gerard and TfL, we can get a really rich API feed, but it's only stop level. So how do we get that into like as a look across all of TfL? There's all of these quite different things that we just want to ask. So we've put a constraint there that we cannot ask the local authority to transform data. Data must exist within the local authority. We do not need to do any audits. So this is, we don't want to create something and then say to local authorities, you must go out and audit every bus stop. We know that people possibly won't have the money for that. They may not have the time for that. They will probably not have the resources. And also audit against what standard, how often does this need to be done? All of those questions. And it was just like, if we just have a constraint that there's no audit, that just helps us wipe away a lot of those questions. And the final constraint is no changes can be made to the NaPTAN schema. So whatever we do, we cannot make any changes to the NaPTAN schema, and we also have to assume that still 80-something% of the local authorities are on 2.1. So producing 2.1 data. So we've put some real tight constraints in there. So what the alpha is going to be doing is proving with a limited data set that data can be ingested and held. So we can take data in these various messy formats, and we can hold it, and it can be updated, and we can keep track of that and do all the metadata around that. I want to prove with a limited data set that data can be linked to NaPTAN stop information. So if we've got a data set that's sitting just outside of NaPTAN, there is a way of linking the two together in a programmatic way. And we want to prove with a limited data set that this data can then be exported or surfaced in a way that a data consumer can then use. So this is about saying, if we've got this data, there's a way for somebody like Dan or Andy acting as a data consumer can actually get in and consume this data. So the limited data sets that we are looking at, the 2010 to 2016, we've just called it the Olympic data set because trying to providence some of it, we just reached the point of just calling it the Olympic data set. It's got about 40% coverage of stops. So we've done some work. Accessibility is listed simply as wheelchair, true, false. And what's the other one? It is assistance, true, false. That's it. There is some other parts to the assistance and all of that, but that is the limitation of the information that's available. There are 11 LAs that are completely uncovered in this audit or in this data set. And all of the 900 stops are included. So you'll be pleased to know, Dan, we've got another copy of the 900 stops floating around here. So we've got that's the Olympic data. Then we've got TfL. Thank you, Gerard, and your team have been wonderful. So we've got information from their travel planner. So we're having a look at how we could take that on board, how we could combine that, how we could look at that across other local authorities. If you're needing to plan to come to London from Newcastle, do you need to kind of change travel planners halfway through your journey to understand accessibility in Newcastle and accessibility in London? These are little things that we're trying to play with. And the lovely people at Northamptonshire who aren't here today, because they're in the process of being split out, Northamptonshire's being split into two, and they are actually having to go out and do a complete physical audit of every bus stop for the street furniture that exists and look at the repairs that need to go on. They have a very complete, very fresh, done only in the last couple of months, physical audit information, which they were able to provide us. So we've got a really nice stop level audit as well, where we can look at what street furniture, what physical infrastructure is there. And then there's a couple of other little bits and pieces that we might include if we can get them and if we can play with them. So the next one is GBRTT, Great British Rail, National Rail. They have done a very complete platform level audit of accessibility across, and it's not quite yet all, it's 2/3, I believe, of the national rail stations for accessibility. And they have a travel website that you can look at where you can get some of this information for some, but it doesn't give you platform level. And we know that at some stations there are some platforms that have lifts and some platforms that don't. People need to know that. So we need to get that. Those who've heard me talk about NaPTAN know that to get that, we need platform level rail station information in NaPTAN, which we don't have currently. So that's why this one is in the yellow area, because if we can get hold of that information, there's some limitations on how much we can use it, but that would also allow us to do some proof of concept and look at how we needed to improve data. And then also Somerset have also recently done a physical audit. However, the person that we're dealing with is just well busy, so we may or may not be able to get that data into our alpha. Andy, before I run on to the proposed alpha journey, I'll stay here and answer your question.
Can I ask who you've been talking to at Somerset? Because I know a lot of their personnel have just changed.
Yes and no. I can't remember the person's name. I don't want to go hunting through my mailbox while I'm on screen. Okay. When we take a break in...
You can get back to me on that one.
Yeah, I'll get back to you. It's literally one of the newish people. He's just been swamped and was just like, I'm sorry, I'm a bit swamped. So we've made him, and Elise was able to give us her data, which meant that we had a non-urban stop level audit, which is what we wanted for our alpha. So it'd be great to get it. It's not vital to the alpha now. Does that make sense, Andy? But I'll get you the details so you can help me chase.
Yep.
Fantastic.
All the he's have left, as far as I'm aware. There's only girls in Somerset left, or ladies in Somerset.
Or non-binary people. Ladies and non-binary peeps. It was, I can't remember the guy's name. It was definitely a man I was talking to. So we proposed planning a little alpha journey because we wanted to look at a journey that somebody might take. And for those who know where I live, I can basically do this entire journey and be home from either end of it within 20 minutes. We wanted to run an alpha journey just to look at how you plan across multiple travel modes and things like that. We know you can definitely do this in TfL. So we wanted to have a look at, if we combine all of this data, do we come up with something that's a little bit richer? Is it pulling across some of the more information? So we've got it going from Victoria Station, and now we've been very bland on saying Victoria Station, because you can go from Victoria bus, rail, coach, or metro station. So there's a nice choice of stations to go from when we say Victoria Station. We can go to Westminster Pier, and there's a number of different ways that you can go from Victoria to Westminster Pier. On Westminster Pier, we hop on a riverboat, because why not go on a riverboat? The multimodal, but one of the least used modes. You can go on a riverboat journey to Greenwich Pier, and from Greenwich Pier, which does actually link up, despite the fact on Google it doesn't link up, it does actually link up to the bank. From Greenwich Pier, you can then get a bus or some other kind of transport up to Greenwich Observatory. So we thought this was a nice journey that's relatively representative. It's got quite a few changes of modes. It's multimodal. It's multi-operator. it's a little bit harder to do it multi-LA, but we can start to have a look of whether we could do this, we could plan this journey with the data that we can surface. So it was chosen as one that we could just use it as an example within our system. So where are we? We are here and at this time. So what else have we done? Let's scroll up to here. Now, you'll go, Jay, that is a very pretty scope horizons diagram. And it is not clear where those scopes and horizons are. And that is the point that I'm trying to make here. So this is actually based on a picture of mine that I took in Corfu a couple of years ago. There are 3 horizons that we are aiming for. And we always have those horizons of, everyone talks about the North Star, the foothills and the mountains and how you're moving across. Our mountains, it's not entirely clear which of those 3 mountains we should be aiming for. It's not entirely clear exactly, should we be aiming for the furthest one away, which is the smallest one here, or one of the 2 ones that are closer, or are these more horizon 2? Where do the foothills come in, and where is that boundary between what we're trying to do? There's bits of paths across what we can see. Should we follow those paths? Should we build something a little bit more direct? This is where, when we talk about our scopes and horizons, it's still very unclear. And hopefully from this discovery in alpha, we can clarify out some of that scope and that horizon. So essentially, at the moment, our alpha is coming up, and I've called it the garden. A data consumer could ingest accessibility via an API. So this is what we hope to achieve at the end of the alpha. A data consumer could ingest accessibility via an API that links to NaPTAN data. A data consumer will be able to ingest accessibility information for a limited number of stops at CoCodes via an API. So you could grab 3 or 4 stops, you could plan a journey and say, give me the accessibility information for this journey. You could pull it out stop by stop, you could do it for grouping. The information surfaced is minimal and might change without notice. The information surfaced is minimal and consistent for a mode or local authority. So we're not saying we're going to have cross-modal or cross-local authority consistency in this first alpha. And the information surface is minimal and consistent between modes, operators, and local authorities. So we might even get to the point of maybe we do get a bit of that consistency in, but we're not entirely sure that we can do it. The foothills, this is the private beta. So this is what we're now starting to look at of when we finish the alpha and the discovery, what would be the goal of the next piece of work? How would we know that we got this right if we got into a private beta? So if we started to build this out and give people access to get this information in, start to consume it, start to hold it, start to do any inferences on it, and started to publish it, what would the outcome be like? Where would we draw that line? So it's basically Brenda can plan a limited journey using a travel planner. Brenda will be able to view accessibility information and the travel planner for a limited number of stops at CoCodes. The information Brenda views is minimal and might change. The information is consistent across modes and local authorities, or it might, if we're really lucky, we might be able to start to get it consistent, but it's only for a small number of local authorities. We might only have, with the Olympic data, we might only have 3 or 4 more local authorities giving us information. So that private beta is slowly building up the information and building up that data set across the country. And then the final version, where our North Star is Brenda can use a travel planner. She'll be able to view accessibility information in the travel planner, and it's consistent across modes, operators, and local authorities. So it's really, really clear what she can get at which point, and there's nothing that's described differently by one or more of those. Does that scoping kind of make sense to people? And does the fact that it's a little bit blurry and not yet completely firmed up, is that also okay for people at this point in time, knowing that we're going to firm it up over the next couple of months? Excellent. I feel like I'm doing a good job on my narrativizing. let's move across. So what I've done, and you're all like, we've seen this before. You've all seen it before, is I wanted to look at the service and what questions I think the different people ask. So all of the data producers, I've got 4 types, and I'm going to run through them because I know there's a few new people. So what we do is we know that we've got data producers, and that's a local authority who gives data into the NaPTAN service. What we also know is we could say that they're all the same, but they're actually kind of not. There's 147, and they 147 ACCO codes. Things are done slightly differently. So we broke them down into 4 types, and some of these typings are around how people work, how the teams work, and also their relationship to the data. So we have, the first one is John, who does it all. John manages the whole of the NaPTAN process for a local authority and is a team of 1. And we have an example, which is Essex. I'll run through the questions around accessibility in a moment. The other one is Sindhu and Kim, who are pairing on it. They pair on the NaPTAN process for a local authority and are generally in a non-hierarchical team. In practice, one might be called a manager and one might not, but they both tend to do exactly the same roles. They often have split some of the work between them, and they easily cover for each other. An example is Glasgow. We then have Andy, the mega agent, and also Tansy, the mega agent. Agents come in 2 broad types, and we've just called them Andy and Tansy because that's literally it. And they also have a local authority in the background, which is this little person behind them, because we often don't have direct connections to the local authorities that Andy is working for or that Tansy is working for. Although they're there and we need to be aware of them, they're kind of facing away from us as the NaPTAN service. Andy looks after the NaPTAN data processes for many local authorities. They're in a commercial relationship with the LA. They host the software and provide services. So there's a couple of different models of work that Andy works on. Tansy looks after the NaPTAN data and process for many local authorities. They receive updates and add them to the software and then publish. So the Tansy is dependent on the local authority sending in updates in a spreadsheet, which she then puts into her systems with her team, and they then publish them. The LA has a relationship with the agent and not directly with NaPTAN, which is really important. And we've just put down Wales as an example. Anything that begins with a 5 is run by Tansy and her team. And then we've got what we've called Gerard and team, and this is about having a larger team looking after an ACCO code, because we need to be aware of this when we're trying to think about things and think about models of working. Gerard manages the NaPTAN process for a large local authority and has a team who often do all the day-to-day work, and there is often a hierarchical relationship. An example is TfL. We also have Transport for Greater Manchester. Falls into that. Spite, South Yorkshire falls into something similar. So there's a team that's involved, not a single person. So what we might find is we're asking a question of Gerard, and it's actually somebody else on the team who is looking after that process or has that information. So the questions that we've had for all of our local authorities, and I'm sure that there's variations between them, which is why it's really good to have you all here, because you can put extra questions that you've got about this, is, do I have the data that we need for accessibility? What if it takes a lot of extra effort to create it? Hopefully it doesn't, because that's one of our constraints. And do I need to do an audit? Hopefully you don't, because that's one of our constraints. I'm going to give you 2 minutes while I go and make myself a drink. I'm literally just going to run and grab a glass of water. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to add any extra questions that you might have. And this is especially for Andy and Gerard, but anyone else who's working at a local authority. What other questions have you got so far that you think that I should be aware of when I do this? What are the other things that I need to totally have my mind on and answer in this service? What are the things that are prickling away in the back of your head? So I'm going to turn on the timer. I'm going to turn it on for 3 minutes. going to start the timer. I'm going to drop myself off the camera and off the mic, and I'll be back in 3 minutes, and hopefully we'll have a number of questions. Oh, does everyone know how to use Mural, by the way? Little doodad on the side, the second one down, you pull out a sticky note and you can just grab them and drop them wherever you need them and colour them and write in them. So I've stuck you a couple of sticky notes that you can write on there if you've not used it before. And then I will be back. Right, I did well on that. You've got about 30 seconds left. Let me just... Excellent. Those are two very good questions that I see. Are there any others floating around? I see a little bit of one. I'll run through the rest of the users as well. I just wanted to focus on the local authorities. Cool. Time's up. So we've got two questions. Who has the NaPTAN ownership at the local authority? That's a really interesting question. We often assume that it's the person who is giving us the data, but I know that there is a responsibility relationship or ownership that we need to think about and manage sometimes. So that's another good one to take through. In many local authorities, the bus stop infrastructure is controlled by the people who do NaPTAN or the transport department. Yep, that's really good.
I missed the not from that.
Ah,
there should be a not in there.
Yeah, I was going to say it sounded, but I'm also aware that the infrastructure information may not be held by the people who are doing the NaPTAN data, so they may not know what infrastructure there is out there, and this is really good for us to know. So we've made some assumptions that everyone can easily get this data. If people can't get their street furniture data, it's understanding what the situation is. Is it just talking to the right person and saying, hey, I need this data, can you give it to me? Or is it a relationship that doesn't exist? Is it a group that doesn't exist and it's all done by a contractor? So these are all really, really interesting things for us to dive into. Some LAs have agreements with neighbouring LAs to manage NaPTAN data on their behalf, e.g. Northumberland is managed by Nexus. It is unlikely Nexus would have detailed information on stops throughout Northumberland. Exactly. And then it's understanding, and I think it's really similar to the one that Andy brought up, of just understanding this is going to help us think about how we do this, how we message this. This is why I know with this group and I know with this ecosystem that every single local authority is slightly different. And it's about understanding how we group them together and how we talk to them, how we ask them for the data, how we would bring them on board. If it's somebody who has that kind of relationship where the street furniture is managed by somebody else, is it reasonable that they could do a report once every 12 months? Or is it the sort of thing that even that is beyond the contractual reasons and things like that? And there are other ways that we can do some things around data, which is what I'll talk about. So it's just trying to think. Some infrastructure, e.g. bus shelters, may be the responsibility of the parish and not the highways authorities. Oh, absolutely. I got this from Northamptonshire. I've been sitting in their weekly meetings, although I tend to go to them about twice a month now, understanding things like a bus shelter. I think of a bus shelter, and because I'm living in central London, a very Gerard style bus shelter. There's a Transport for London bus shelter. They all look exactly the same. And then understanding in a lot of places the local parishes own the shelters, but the councils own the footpaths and the road, and then there's agreements over who owns the pole, who owns the lighting, and who owns the curb cut, and then also who owns the holes in the fences for hedgehogs, which was an entire 20-minute discussion on fences and hedgehogs. But understanding that those are real questions that we need to think, that we need to not answer, but we need to take into consideration when we ask somebody for data. We need to understand everybody's situation. So this has been great. Thank you, everyone. So moving quickly along, what are the minimal facilities required for an accessible bus stop? That is the $10 million, because I know 64,000 ain't going to get you much these days, $10 million question. There are some answers to this. We want to understand how we represent that, but also, I'm trying to think of the right way of saying this. There are some really lovely standards. There are some really lovely wishes in BSOG, in bus back betters proposals. There are some really lovely proposals in bus back better grants. And we want to understand what actually happens on the ground, how that looks like. Can you tell the difference? There's some really interesting pieces around what makes a bus stop accessible for who. Because what's accessible for me as a stick walker or as a stick wielder may not be accessible for somebody who's in a wheelchair that needs level access or fairly level access. Gerard, I see your hands up.
Yeah, very briefly about minimum standards is an interesting question, because even in London, we have a lot of hail, and it's similar to demand responsive transport, and this isn't just unusual to London, which is hail and ride buses, where by definition there isn't a defined stop. And you can't actually guarantee a level boarding place because of parked cars and that sort of thing. And I think that probably quite a useful thing to decide on is are hail and ride stops automatically, or hail and ride sort of points automatically seen as inaccessible because they can't be guaranteed to be accessible. Whereas, as I say, an accessible bus stop should, unless there's a really selfish individual park their car there, and it does happen, should generally be accessible 99 times out of 100. So I think that's sort of the minimum standards comment is a crucial one, and I think it that needs to factor in hail and ride as well.
Absolutely. There's also an interesting question, because I was like, marked. We'll just make it marked, because I was pointing to Gerard there. Gerard has marked hail and rides because that was part of street versus schema. The hail and ride scheme areas are in some places marked upon street poles. which means that it's marked. And then there was also questions from a local authority into me. I still haven't answered it because I honestly don't know, and I've just said I don't know. How marked is marked? When does something go from custom to marked? Is it when a flag exists? Is it when a bus cage exists on the road? Is it when there's a bus shelter? Where is that on that continuum between a custom stop or a hail and ride stop that is literally a part of the street to a marked stop with the bus cage and the curb and the tactile paving and the post and the bus shelter and the advertising and the next bus information, etc. Where does that transform from one thing to another? Yes, I know it's ridiculous. I'm pointing out a binary situation and asking about a spectrum. Believe me, it is pretty much all of my life of pointing out that the two things that we think of completely separate, there's actually a blending moment in the middle where we need to understand exactly where those lines are or where those lines might be and agree on them, because what Andy might mark down as custom might have some infrastructure there, because sometimes the custom stop is opposite the road to a stop that is exactly the same except it's got a pole. So so there's a lot of nuance in there. And then it becomes down to, if we then try to infer information from those stops, how do we do that? Sorry, small aside there. Let's move along. So very, very quickly, just to make sure that I think I've got all the accessibility data consumers. So I've run it across this way. And pretty much everybody's got the same questions, but I just wanted to make sure that I've got the right consumers. So we've got Mike and Amy run Travelline. They're the product data managers of Travelline and PlusBus, solutions built on NaPTAN data that run websites for travel planning and purchasing tickets. Julie manages PlusBus. We've just put in PlusBus there because it runs on modified NaPTAN data, and just trying to explain to people how PlusBus and links in with NaPTAN data. Pete runs an API. Pete manages software solution that combines NaPTAN data with other travel data for his clients. This is very much like EtoWorld. We've used EtoWorld as an example in here. David runs a GIS site. David manages a software solution that combines NaPTAN data with geographical information for analysis by his clients, like Basemap. And then we've also got Dimitri runs a travel planning app, because we had a really good discussion with Citymapper. Dimitri's manages a travel planning app built on NaPTAN, TransExchange and SiriRT data. Example is Citymapper, which is multi-operator, multimodal, but they don't yet do that national travel planning. They tend to work just within a lot more isolated siloing. For example, I can plan my journey in Citymapper, I can plan my journey from my house to the train station, and then from the train station to Manchester is another planner, and then using Citymapper I can get from the train station to my next space within Manchester, but I can't do the whole journey. So it was just trying to describe that there's a couple of different travel planners within here, and we've got two mentioned, one of which is that whole journey national across local authorities, and one of which is within a local authority. Just trying to get our heads around it. We believe everybody's got pretty much the same question. What data would I get? How would I make changes to the data if I need? If I've said this stop be goodly accessibility wise, and somebody comes to me and says this stop not be accessible, you need to change the data. Who do you tell? Which Ghostbuster do you get in? How do you tell somebody this data be wrong? And it's a NaPTAN question as well, but we haven't really answered it for NaPTAN. We definitely need to answer it when we're talking about bus stops. If we're saying something's accessible, it turns out it's really not. We need to know how to loop that data back in, and what's the schema for the data. Honestly, right now we don't know. We've got some ideas. We want to evolve it. We want to figure it out. And then we've got some DFT users, which have just kind of broken out. So we've got Ava, who manages BODs, Andrew, who supports users, Ron, who does Cody NaPTAN, and John, who manages policy, and Tom, who does data analysis. So we want to look at things like, Ava needs to know whether they need to include this data into BODs. We want to sit down, show them the data, have a look at whether they put it in, and it is that connection between a stop and transport, because that's what BODs cares about in their trans exchange. But BODs doesn't produce anything that goes to a passenger. They produce stuff that tends to go into analysis and goes off to other bus operators. So it's very much, okay, so how would we get this data off to passengers? What does this actually mean when we put it into BODs? If for the support team for NaPTAN, how would I explain what we need to data producers? How do I explain what data we supply to data consumers? Can we articulate what this data is clearly to people? And can I explain the provenance of any data? If I have a piece of data, is it very clear where it came from? Was it inferred? Was it derived? Did we get it direct? Is it something that we pulled up from doing some data analysis? Is that provenance really clear to people? Ron, who's in who's one of the coders on NaPTAN, Cody NaPTAN, can I explain the provenance of any data? John, who manages policy, one of his big questions is what new policy implications will come from this data? If we start to provide this data, what else do we have to do with it? What does it mean? Can we understand if we uncover that somewhere is not accessible? What does that mean in terms of policy? What does that mean in terms of the Bus Back Better policies and the other policies that are out there? And then when we do data analysis, can we understand this data around each local authority? Can we map it to sociological bandings for a postcode? Are there accessible and inaccessible postcodes? And is that part of, levelling up, that we need to be aware of these things? These are all the different questions we've got for people. Just give me 2 seconds. Right. So those are the people or the users that we think that we've got, and the questions that we think, the big questions that we think we've got to answer. Does this make sense to everybody? It's very similar to a lot of the other services that we've laid out. Fantastic. Right, knowing how much time I've got, what is there? Well, it exists, but it doesn't, and that's it's a very complex answer about its existence. The Olympic data exists, but hasn't been updated since 2016 and doesn't cover the entirety of the country, and. So one of the things that I'm doing is I need to write up in this section what we've got in the current data, and it's going to be, it kind of exists but doesn't. It's a bit Schrodinger's cat. I've got to write out a comms plan. Today is starting off our comms plan 8 weeks late, to socialise what we're doing, why we might want to talk to people, what sort of questions we want to ask you, and how we're thinking about this. This is where it gets a little bit more abstract, because I'm trying to describe some of what we're thinking of with the alpha. So excuse me if it comes across a little bit very high level. We're just figuring out how we're going to put some of this data together and what it might look like in terms of concepts. So a high-level service summary is NaPTAN publishes a set of accessibility infrastructure at a stop level. This can be viewed through more than one accessibility lens, e.g. power wheelchair, manual wheelchair, blind. So we've just created, out of Jay's brain, 3 accessibility lenses that may or may not be the right ones. We'll find out when we do some more user research. But using those accessibility lenses, we will look at what there is physically at a bus stop and how we understand that. The components that we're going to look at is, we've got NPTG, NaPTAN, which is our gazetteer. So this is, if it's called High Street, which High Street is it? We've got NaPTAN, which is the what is where, which is, this is the High Street bus stop in Castleton, to just randomly choose a word, and this is what that bus stop looks like, and there are 4 of them, and they are indicated with these indicators and all of that fine detail there. We've got a little manage removal component that we've put in, and it's now there and it's working really well. And we're going to build out another little component. This is what we're looking at the proof of concept of, called accessibility. So it's going to hang off to the side from NaPTAN. So this is kind of how we're looking at it in the best way that we can. Not in our control. So we start off with stuff that's not in our control and will inform how we best serve data to a journey planner. So not in our control is the street furniture data and other data that people have about what's there. Then we have, as John, who does it all for a local authority, sending the accessibility data I have to DFT. I want to know what I could submit so that I can indicate best what the situation is on the street for my local authority. We know that everyone wants to do a really good job. So we know that John wants to be able to tell us exactly what's on the street, and he wants to be able to tell us in a way that we can use. Then, so we have NaPTAN data, solid, never going to change. Well, we're never going to try to change it. And then we've got this accessibility data. Now, one of the things that we're looking at with our accessibility data is we might have 3 layers of it. Thanks, Richard. We might have not so much 3 layers, but 3 types, and they would be given slightly different weighting. And this is just what we're starting to play with. So we've got the Olympic data, which we might actually be able to build a little bit on, but that's a tiny little side thing that I'll talk about probably in the March meeting. So we've got the Olympic data that we can start off with as core, but we know that it was last updated in 2016 or so. It may or may not be very correct, very complete, and it basically just says wheelchair or not wheelchair. We've then got the street furniture data, which can then be built into inferred data. So if we know from the street furniture data that there is a curb cut and there is tactile paving, we know that this stop could be used by a wheelchair user. They're not going to be stranded with a jump down to continue their journey. There is a curb cut close by. We know if there's tactile paving, we know that a blind user will be able to easily tell where the edge of the road is and things like this. So from that street furniture data, we can create some inferred data about accessibility. It's not directly proven, it's not a direct audit, but it's inferred from another piece of data. And then we've got auditable data. So one of the things I've tried to indicate with the numbers is we might rank these. So for example, if we've got a stop and we've got inferred data, we probably won't need to use the Olympic data because the inferred data is going to be more recent and also slightly more goodly, slightly betterer. It's going to tell us a little bit more information. And then with that information, we will build this accessibility data set, which can then be combined with the NaPTAN data set. So this means that as Mike and Amy, who run Travelline, I want to obtain data about accessibility infrastructure at a stop level so that I can use this within my journey travel planner. So they can say, I'm going to the stop, we have the ACCO code, and then we would also be able to query from the accessibility what accessibility data we have for that stop. Kind of a little bit there, but this is what we're trying out as a proof of concept to see whether or not it's possible. We might find that this is too hard to do and we need to think of another way of doing it. And then not in our control is NaPTAN, but will inform us how we best serve data to a journey planner. And then we've also got some stuff that is not in our control and will also inform how we build that data out. So one of the questions is, should I show only journeys with accessible infrastructure to a user? So if my user says to me that I need step-free access, should I only show them something where from the accessibility data we can show the step-freeness or of those stops? Or should I show the accessible infrastructure of a chosen journey to a user? So if a user has chosen to build a journey, has chosen a journey on the travel planner, should we show it at that level? And I know that the TfL planner kind of switches between these two modes at various times, and there's different ways of switching between it. and seeing it. And it's kind of like, well, if you're doing that, what do we need to provide as NaPTAN so that your systems can do that? Is there differences in how we need to give you the data? Is there ways that we need to code it up so that it's easy for somebody to see? And then finally, we've got Brenda looking at her journey using a travel planner. And it's like, well, what would Brenda like to see? And I've just built out a random journey with a couple of different icons trying to show accessibility in terms of step-free or no steps, and also in terms of blind access, in terms of blind accessibility. And there's quite a variety of different ways of displaying this data. So, but what do we need to give to a journey planner so they can make these choices, they can innovate at that journey planner level and display those? That's, I'm doing kind of okay on time, I think. Yeah, we've got about half an hour. I have raced through the last part of that. Does this kind of, and I'm just going to zoom to the right level, does this kind of make sense in terms of like a draft service? It's a bit sketchy. I haven't drawn out all the pieces. There's some interesting questions still to poke around inside a lot of this. But does this make sense to everybody? Lisa?
Yeah, I was just going to say, yeah, it makes perfect sense because it's something that we're always trying to kind of solve in terms of that the customer's journey planning. I think the issue for us is that we've got this, we do kind of have this information in terms of accessibility. We just don't do anything with it apart from our own internal uses. So to take that step where we're kind of making it available to software developers, but then it's kind of linked to the work we've done with disruption messages. We can gather the information, but supplying it in a format that is usable and that they can output it to customers to make it usable for them to plan their trips. That's the big question, isn't it? So yeah, it all makes sense, and it's something that we're definitely wanting to move towards, but it's just that kind of realizing it is the tricky bit. But I guess we all know that, don't we?
If it was that simple, we would have done it.
Yeah.
Lisa, what I will do is, if you're okay, I'll link you up with our user research team. We've got two lovely people, Itai and Willem, who are doing a whole pile of user research discovery interviews to understand what you've got, to understand how you think about it and stuff like that. And I think it would be a really, really nice couple of hours across the next 2 months, just getting that information out so we can include it in this kind of thing. And even if you can send us, if we have that discussion and we can get the information from you, you could become another one of our limited data sets of just how we could put that in and how we play with it. Because that's what we're also trying to do, is understand, because that's why I said in that first assumption, we're assuming that people have this data, they just don't, that you just can't publish it, or if you can, it's published in a silo.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we get it out like the open data that NaPTAN is? That was one of the things that meant that NaPTAN joined up user journeys. How can we get this accessibility out so that we can join up accessible user journeys? One of the big things is I want to get this all this information about rail stations and be able to publish it nice and cleanly within travel planners, because there's some really good information there, but you need to have really, really detailed platform level planning being available, because that also makes a difference as to which platform your trainer's coming in at will make a difference as to some of the decisions you need to make on which exit to go to, on how easy it is to get to your next, how many minutes to leave between trying to change modes in a multimodal journey. Makes a massive difference. A short thing, walking with a stick, not being able to do stairs, having York Station, lovely station. I really love York Station. It's so beautiful. Having to quickly transit from one platform to one that was 5 platforms away, and not being able to do the stairs, I actually had other passengers corral the guard to hold the train to wait for me because they were waiting for me to be able to make the journey because I had to wait for lifts, and it slows you down by a good couple of minutes. So I was quite a few minutes behind the rest of the passengers. And fortunately, some of the people I was with signalled to the guards so that they knew there was a couple of us who were running along trying to make this platform change, because those last minute platform changes kill you. Especially, well, they don't actually kill you, but they're really, really hard to make if you've got access needs, because waiting and the journey's often much longer, and all of those things just really super stress. Anyway, side thing. Lisa will get you in touch. That was
Brilliant,
a really
thank
good
you.
point. Andy.
One, I think it was put on the slide earlier on about the minimum facilities, is the facilities required at a bus stop to make it accessible may be different for each vehicle that goes to that bus stop. That was something I had from an operator I was talking to the other day, because some of his vehicles will be able to serve a custom stop that has no pavement at all, because they have ramps that can be unfolded down, as well as it kneels slightly and things like that. So you know, it's we can't just do accessibility on the stop, because the height of the stop curb could be different for each type of vehicle.
Curb is KERB, isn't it, in this country? Yes. Yeah.
Maybe.
Just because I know there's CURB, which is also a different sort of curb, and I was trying to remember which way around you spell it. Height of stop curb might be different. One of the things that I have thoughts, but that's a really good one. Thank you for that. Richard.
Yes, you were talking about changing trains at York, and that made me think. In NaPTAN we have records for platforms, don't we? Which may be platforms in railway stations or departure stands at bus stations, and some of them may or may not be accessible, and also the entrances go into NaPTAN as well. And it may be that the entrance might be classed as accessible and the platforms might be accessible, but the critical thing is the passage between the two, isn't it? So I wonder whether we need to look at marking these path links as accessible or not accessible. An example that comes to mind is Oxford Circus Underground Station in London, where there's an easy cross-platform interchange between the Victoria line and the Bakerloo line, which people who know the system will always go that way. If you're travelling from, say, King's Cross to Waterloo and London Underground, I would always change at Oxford Circus because the interchange is easy, but journey planners don't give you that information.
Absolutely.
So that's something we could usefully consider. It's that there's passageways between the different elements of a bus station or a railway station or an interchange that we need to look at.
Absolutely. So that is the secondary layer, that complicated layer that I was talking about, of if we can solve it, if we can get some information about the bus stops in there that's a little bit more than the Olympic data, a bit more reliable, a bit more up to date, then we can start solving for some of these harder ones. Just to confirm, I'm just going to take a breath. We have 2,500 train stations. We only have 3 train platforms at the moment in NaPTAN. There is a lot of work to get our platforms right so that we can start to ingest platform level information for trains. For the situation you were talking about in metros, they're a lot better, but there is still information and there's still gaps across the place. So, and especially between platforms and entrances. And that example that you brought up is one that I used when I talked with TfL, because it is one of the ones of, as a disabled traveller, everyone knows that it's like the big shibboleth of, do you know the best way around London and to do that particular journey? And it's like, yeah, you do this, you come down from King's Cross, use the Victoria line to Oxford Circus and then cross to the Bakerloo line, and then you've got, and it's a completely level version. You don't have to change high. You don't have to change through the station or anything. It's also completely unplannable by most travel planners. I also have a little accessibility one from Elephant and Castle, which isn't accessible, but Blackfriars is. Elephant and Castle up to the Elizabeth line actually isn't on a lot of travel planners because it's a mix of Thameslink and TfL data, and so it's an interesting one. Anyway, diving into the weeds, diving out of the weeds, out of that rabbit hole. But thank you, Richard. That's a very good rabbit hole to know. Jonathan.
Thanks. Just a couple of things from a local authority perspective. I was a bit puzzled at the sort of idea of different concepts of what a custom stop is. I was out of this game from about 2011 until a couple of years ago, so I may have missed things. But my understanding was if there was anything that physically shows it's a bus stop, be that a tired bus stop plate on a lamp post, road markings, anything, then it's a marked stop. If there's absolutely nothing that indicates, then it's custom. But I guess other people may have interpreted that differently. Really, what I was wanting to say from a local authority perspective is that sort of personally, this Olympic data concept has passed me by completely, which may be my problem. But getting this data into NaPTAN is going to be a big task for us. We haven't really got a proper asset management register of bus stops, and I suspect a lot of local authorities are in the same boat. We've got detail of projects we've done, be that for a specific corridor. We're doing some corridors now as part of BSIP. We've done some in the past. Some individual stops have been done through developer funding for that very specific locality. But trying to pull all of that data together, it is going to be a big ask. And we may almost have to go out and do a physical audit to get it there. I can't speak for other authorities. I see there's really not a great representation on this meeting from the smaller sort of shire and unitary councils. I suspect a lot of them are in the same boat. I perhaps devote sort of more of my time to NaPTAN and travel line stuff than most authorities do now. While my data goes through Travel Line Southwest, National PTI, and Andy, I think it's sort of fair to say that Andy only really gets involved in the detail of the data if I do something that causes a technical error, like to not put something in a mandatory field, and he's not involved with sort of checking that I've used the right name for this stop, or put it in the right street or the right location. A lot of local authorities now, they're not in a travel line region. The attitude seems to be that all of this goes through bots, through the operators. It's really not our problem anymore. Having worked for bus operators for a few years until I came back into local authority, I know that one local authority, even getting a NaPTAN number out of them for a new stop was an uphill struggle. Getting them to do anything more than that, I think, may be wishful thinking. So obviously, I see what you're trying to do. At a personal level, I think it's a great idea, but at a practical level, getting local authority resources to do all of this, I think may well be quite a big ask.
Jonathan, I'm going to ask one thing of you, because I think you've made excellent points, and I really, really appreciate your thoughts on this and your time. Can I get you in contact with our user researchers, because you are the people that we're trying to talk to? Because, like I said, we're trying to get a sense of all of the things. If we're only working with TfL and with Andy and some of the bigger authorities, we're going to miss these little nuances, and we're going to have DFT and the government asking for things that are just going to be so hard for people. That's why we want to get you in with our user researchers to understand what you've got, what you do have and what you don't have, and how you're thinking about it, so that we can say we could only get this for 60% of the local authorities. Is that going to be enough? Is that going to be enough to consider doing this? Or do we have to be able to get 100% of the local authorities on board for this to be worthwhile doing? That's actually a really interesting question to ask. And then it becomes, if you don't have the ability to give us this data, what does that mean in terms of other parts? Would that be okay, Jonathan, if I got you in contact? Or are you, and feel free to say, ask me when you're not recording.
Yeah.
And
No,
because
I'm quite happy if you or your colleagues want to contact me, then I'll do my best. But as I say, it's potentially the local authorities who aren't taking part in these meetings who sort of their ability and willingness to turn resources to get involved may be sort of more questionable than mine.
And that's part of what we're just, like I said, trying to do and reach out to as many people as possible. So like when I do the emails out, we do email to all the local authority contacts that we've got. I am aware, Midlothian and Dumfries as well, that we've got places who haven't provided NaPTAN data for more than several years. So we've got people who we're desperately trying to get data out of, even just core NaPTAN data out of, where they're not engaging with us at all. So it's really understanding how we can get contact with those people, how we can build something that at least tempts them in or lets them know that they're not going to have to do an awful lot if they want to be part of this. And that's also as part of this, do I build a map that shows Brenda or shows Tom the data analysis, where we've got data, where we've got goodly data, and where people would love to give us data, they just don't have it, or where people just aren't connecting with us, and we're using the Olympic data. Now, the Olympic data was inferred from NaPTAN. I don't believe that they did an audit of most of the stops. They did an audit of some spaces, but of most of the bus stops, they made some assumptions based on the type of stop and where it was, whether or not it was accessible, and they just literally have accessibility as wheelchair, true, false, and assistance, true, false. So it's not the greatest of data sets, but it's a starter for 10. And I have a proposal that we're going to look at and see what happens in terms of extending that data, of saying, so here's the thing. If I said it's a marked stop within an urban environment, as compared to, so within a city compared to like a suburb or a town or a village. If I said if it's a marked stop within a city, that's more likely to be accessible than a marked stop within a village. Because marked stop within a village could just have a pole and be the side of the road. So we're going to have a look and see and do some work and see if we can use some of the NaPTAN, some of the MPTG locality information combined with the type of stop to make a second version of the Olympic data set that's a little bit more extended, that we can use across the country, that allows you to talk about accessibility in terms of slightly more urban, slightly less urban environments. But that's one of the, as my team would call it, a J idea that is presented with a lot of enthusiasm that may or may not actually work out. So it's one of those ideas that we're just going to go and poke around and see whether or not it does actually work if you did something like that. If we then go and use Google Maps and walk around those bus stops, do we find accessible ones if we make those assumptions? Or are we too unlikely to accidentally mark something as accessible when it's not? And also, what's worse for Brenda? Being told that a stop's not accessible for her to see that it is, or to be told that a stop is accessible and for her to discover that it's not when she gets there. And that's also one of those little interesting questions around how we infer the data and how we pull the data across. Does that make sense, Jonathan?
I think so, yes.
Yeah.
Thanks.
No worries. Andy, I see you've got your hand up.
Again. Yes, sorry.
I didn't say
I've got
again
couple of
because I love your question.
Well, there's some of it is a question. Like for journey planning, we are concentrating on the bus stop and the bus. We already know most of the buses are accessible. Otherwise, they shouldn't be running, etc. as a public service bus that's registered. Now, the stop, whether it's accessible, is another one we're going to put on yes or no. The trouble is with that, we could probably got the data for 40 or 50% of those stops. But if we put that data in, does it then make all the other stops non-accessible? Because most of them, or a lot of them, probably will be. The other bit of the key or the journey plan is actually from pavement to pavement between the rail stop and the bus stop. Is that pavement going to be accessible? And can you cross the road in those places? Because we use, on all journey planners, we use an underlying GIS level data to make that up. Now, is that accessible?
And this is where
the other one,
yep.
the other one that you just mentioned, the marked stop in the village that has a high population of wheelchair users is more likely to be accessible than one other.
Okay,
Anyway.
Let's have a look at I love the way that I type Hockeridge Wood and it comes in here. This is where I want to go. Just bear with me here 2 seconds. I'm going to show you. So here we have a marked bus stop. You'll see that Google going to be on here we are. I have actually stopped at this bus stop, trying to take a slightly better photo than the street view. Actually, you can see the one across the road. So this is a marked bus stop. It is between two villages, one side of the road, and this is an A road, so the traffic is going quite briskly through this 2-lane bit of wood. It's paved, but there's nowhere to go. And on this side of the road, it's even worse. If I can zoom backwards somehow, it's paved, and effectively, when I went there and took a photo, it was just mud. So off the actual bit of paving, it just turns into mud. So that is one which I use as an interesting one. And please briquette. Is it briquette wood? There we are. Briquette wood. So briquette wood, I want to go to just up here. It is on the North Orbital Road. So there is a bus stop here that is actually quite a nice bus stop. It's nicely set up, and when you turn around to cross the road, you've got a little footway to cross it, which is fab. It's not a step-free. There's no step-free way of crossing this road. However, the next bus stop up, just bear with me here a moment while I just zoom up the road, 50 miles an hour. I drove along this road for a bit during lockdown, so I got to know it. There's a bus stop just up here, which again is a lovely bus stop, quite well set out. Lovely bus stop to cross the road. This is where I need to come back out to this view. Just bear with me here a second. I want to do that. No, I don't want to do that. Stop doing the thing. I want to close this and go to and put on the layers because you can actually see it. So to get from our bus stop, we need to walk along. We need to cross 3 lanes of 50 mile an hour traffic uncontrolled. We then need to walk. We then need to walk along an unpaved central reservation, cross another 2 lanes of 50 mile an hour traffic that's in an uncontrolled fashion to a little island, and then cross one of those 2, and I think they're 30 mile an hour crossings to get onto a footpath. And none of it is lit at night. So it's kind of one of those ones of how do you describe the accessibility of such a stop? And these are questions that are hard to answer. I think once we start to get into talking about accessibility of bus stops, we can then start to look at accessibility of the travel on, of how easy is it to get from this bus stop onto your next one. And I'm just going to use Newington Causeway, London. This is my neck of the wood, just around the corner from me. These are the super accessible bus stops where essentially everywhere you stop, you can essentially hop off and continue on your journey. However, if you wish to have a step-free access onto either the tube or a train, it is not possible at Elephant and Castle because there is no step-free access from Elephant and Castle down onto either of the tube stations. the only way to access the Northern Line is to go further up the road to Borough, and you can step free down to one of them but not the other, and I can never remember which way around it is. I think you can step free onto the northbound, but you can't step free onto the southbound. The southbound, you've got to climb the stairs to and from the lift. So there's weird little partially step-free ability at Elephant and Castle, but it's one of those ones of, yes, all the bus stops might be step-free, but the other infrastructure that you could transfer to around there is not. And this is kind of one of those really interesting, complicated, complex pieces around accessibility, around how you'd move on to your next journey, which I find completely fascinating, and I know that you all will as well. But to do that travel on, I think the first thing we need to do is just get enough of the bus stops, even if it's only for even if only half of NaPTAN has accessibility information. That's better than where we are now. So one of the things is we can iteratively think about this and improve it. We don't have to shoot for the moon. I mean, we can shoot for the moon, certainly, but we don't need to get there in one go. We aren't building a rocket ship. We can iterate as we go along. We can say, right, we're able to say that all of the bus stops in this zone are accessible, and clearly mark that. And they're accessible as step-free, and they're accessible as for blind people because they've generally got tactile pavings on them. And then where else do we go? That to me is a better situation than not knowing how accessible a bus stop is. Does that make some sense around a way forward? Or am I dreaming too hard and Jonathan's going to go, yeah, it's just not going to work. You're going to hit a wall once you get out of the big cities. Once you lose your London-centric wokey views. No, and I'm not saying you're saying I'm woke. Once you lose your London-centric views, you're living in a central city view, you're going to realise that it's far more complicated in the rest of the real world and the rest of the local authorities. Cool. It is just gone 4 o'clock, or it's just coming up to 4 o'clock. Before I finish up, super quick. No, I haven't put it on because I was running too late. There is, yes, there is. Ta-da. We've got a little feedback corner. If you've got any thoughts on today as to what gave you joy, what was good and useful, what was productive from this, what frustrated you, what wasn't good or useful, what drove you mad, what made you sad, what was missing, what stuff should be happening on these, just let us know. And also in terms of contact, it is still just me at the moment. However, there will be somebody coming in within the next month. So at the February meetings, at least you will be able to hopefully meet the new product owner. So that will be really great. And what we're talking about next time on this lovely channel will be in February. We're going to be talking about data quality. What are the things that we're thinking of looking at, and are they the right things? Are they the things that's actually going to move the needle, or are we tidying up data that doesn't need to be tidied, and there's other things that we should really be looking at that would actually make a difference? So let us know. Any big questions, send them through to the central contact email, because there's more than me trying to answer them. So there's actually going to be somebody looking through them and keeping track of them. We are staying generally on top of the triage, if not on top of the Jay tries to create stops that are needed. It's taking, just to let you know, to do the 940 stops and the 910 stops, which is your metros and your other stops. It takes about an hour for me to work through the process of doing them and putting them up. It's because, and honestly, for anyone working in LA, I feel your pain, because trying to work through NaPTAN, trying to work through MPTG as an XML and make the right changes first time. I've yet to actually get a valid file first time. I always have to go back and figure out I've forgotten to close a bracket or there's something that's gone a bit wrong in there. So yeah, that's where we're at. Any questions before we go? Then I will thank everyone for their time and for their input. It's really super valuable. I really, really appreciate the fact that these are 2 hours discussing the finer points of NaPTAN, and sometimes the finer points of an individual field has been some of the things. And I really, really enjoy having people who challenge and ask questions and look at stuff and go, actually, you might need to think about this because that is what I need from you all, and it just makes me feel good that I get that. So thank you all very, very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you. Cheers.